Yo, what's up? Brent here. I can't believe I'm having to write this script and make this video, but I feel like someone has to. The My Hero Academia community is currently driving me insane because they don't know how story structure works, much less how a three-act story structure works. And My Hero Academia very much follows a three-act story structure. Since joining the My Hero Academia fandom, a lot of what I see on Reddit are people saying that the story right now feels rushed and that the final act is, quote, barreling towards a conclusion, and why aren't we getting more school stuff? And this writing is awful. So, the purpose of this video is to break down the various parts within the three-act story structure, then taking those parts and seeing where they fit within the story of My Hero Academia itself, and to prove that what's going on in the story right now makes sense. For the sake of transparency, I feel like I should put it out there that I'm relatively new to the fandom of My Hero Academia. I've been following the story for just over a year, but in that time, I feel like I've become a solid fan. I've watched the anime at least twice in its entirety, and I've watched some of my favorite episodes more than that. I bought all the volumes of the manga and read it all, including reading the stuff that I had already watched in the anime, and once I got caught up there, I read the remaining chapters, and I continue to stay caught up whenever a new chapter comes out. But because I've only been part of the fandom for about a year, perhaps I'm not one to judge how the story is unfolding since I haven't been following it as long as someone else has. With all that being said, when it comes to writing stories and understanding the parts of a three-act story, I can safely say that is something that I do understand. Writing stories is something that I've always enjoyed. Coming up with a crazy plot and fun characters gives me such a rush. Anyways, I digress. The point that I'm trying to make is that writing is something that I've studied for a good chunk of my late teens and adult life, both in and out of a school setting. I'm always looking for ways to improve my writing along with my story and character development. I don't claim to be an expert on writing, but I will claim that I understand it. Before we go any further, I should point out that this script has been written for months, but I've been incredibly busy and waiting for a good time to finally finish it. Anyways, as I was doing research into My Hero Academia and going through various events in the story, along with making sure that I had all the parts of the three-act story structure down correctly, I discovered that some Japanese stories follow a four-act structure called Kishotenketsu. It's broken down as follows. Ki, introduction, show, development, 10, twist, ketsu, conclusion. I felt like I should bring this up because I don't want anyone to think that I'm some ignorant American who doesn't do any proper research, and I almost did that with this video. My goal is to always be as transparent as possible with what I do and don't know. With that being said, based on what I can find, this four-act structure and what I know about the three-act structure, they are still fairly similar. So I do feel my analysis will still work here. Furthermore, the My Hero Academia wiki has the story broken down into 3 parts. However, I'm pretty sure that it's all fan-made, but the breakdown on that site is pretty good regardless. Feel free to correct me or criticize any of my points that I'm making in the comment section below. I'd love to continue the discussion there. Okay, let's continue. Also, for a bit of fun, as you're watching this and as I'm going through the different parts of the three-act structure, think about the different events in My Hero Academia and where you might put those events within the 3 acts, and tell me if any of your events matched with mine in the comment section below. Now, let's begin. First, let's understand what goes into a 3-act story. Naturally, there are 3 acts, and within each set act, there are multiple parts. Act 1 is typically called the setup, and it does just that. It sets up the events and what is about to happen, and it generally takes up about a quarter of the entire story. Within Act 1, we have the initial exposition. During this time, you're provided with information about the world that you're about to be thrown into. And of course, you're introduced to the protagonist of the story. You then learn what that character's goals and motivations are, and the obstacles that are preventing the protagonist from reaching his or her goals. Next, we have the inciting incident. This is arguably the most self-explanatory yet most important part of Act 1, and the whole story for that matter. This is the catalyst that sets the protagonist's journey in motion. Without this moment, there is no story. And to wrap up Act 1, we have what is called Plot Point 1. At this point of the story, the protagonist is moving forward with his or her goals and has decided to pursue a specific outcome. I believe an argument could be made that there could be a few different parts of My Hero Academia that could represent the first plot point, and I'll elaborate more on that when we start filling things in. Act 2 begins, and it's typically called Confrontation, and this is the longest of all the acts. Within this act, there are a few major points. The first of these is Rising Action. This is when the protagonist starts to understand who they are and begins to encounter various obstacles that prevent them from reaching their goal. As tensions rise, we reach the midpoint of the story. This is where the protagonist must overcome the first significant event of the story, in which something goes wrong and in turn usually solidifies the protagonist's resolve. As we progress through Act 2, we continue to have more obstacles for the protagonist and the stakes of the story begin to get higher. All of these obstacles come together at Plot Point 2. Plot point 2 is usually a major crisis where the main protagonist suffers a major defeat, bringing the story to its lowest point, and this is where Act 2 ends. We are now in Act 3, the final act of the story. Act 3 is typically called resolution. In this act, the protagonist faces their greatest challenge or their antagonist. The third act is generally the shortest act of the story and consists of a few parts starting with the pre-climax. This is where we start seeing the antagonist's true power and begins to engage either directly or indirectly with the protagonist, with the protagonist starting to win and overcome the challenges that the antagonist has put before them. Next, we are at the climax of the story. This is another pretty self-explanatory part of the three-act structure. Here we see the protagonist take on the antagonist directly for the last time, and this is where the big action of the story takes place. And last is the denouement. The protagonist obtains victory over the antagonist in this part of the story. The conflict is finally settled. All questions for the reader or viewer should be answered here, with all loose ends being tied up and all tension subsiding, and now the story is over. Okay, now that we've laid out the many parts of the three-act structure, let's see where My Hero Academia fits into all of it. Also, if you're anime only, spoilers are beginning soon. I will warn again just as the spoilers begin. In the very first episode, or a couple of chapters, depending on how you're consuming My Hero Academia, you are given all of the exposition you'll need to understand what's going on in the story. You're introduced to a world where 80% of the population has some sort of superpower, aka quirk, and heroes protect citizens from villains. We are also introduced to Izuku Midoriya, aka Deku. I will be referring to him as Deku going forward, who wants nothing more than to be a hero just like his idol All Might. Unfortunately, he is among the 20% of the population who was born without a quirk. The inciting incident in My Hero Academia basically has several parts, or it's just a really long inciting incident. And that's Deku meeting All Might, learning about All Might's power One for All, Deku receiving One for All, and gaining entry into UA. So this is a case of a story having an assortment of inciting incidents rather than a single event kicking off the story. But if you want to be a stickler about it, the singular inciting incident would probably be Deku meeting All Might and receiving One for All. In any case, let's move on. So here's where things get interesting, because there's a few different parts of My Hero Academia that I believe could represent the first plot point, and honestly, this can be left up to you for interpretation. I'll go over what I initially thought could be the first plot point, and then I'll go over what makes the most logical sense to be the first plot point. Initially, I thought the attack on the USJ was the first plot point because it was the first time that Shigaraki and the League of Villains showed their hand. And the other event that I thought could be the first plot point was the incident in Hosu with the hero killer Stain, because this is when the League of Villains really starts gaining support due to Stain's ideology. However, as I've been writing this, I've been going over My Hero Academia a lot in my head, and I've been doing a bunch of research at the same time into what parts of the story go into certain parts of the three-act structure. And there's one particular part that now makes the most sense to me. If you go over to the My Hero Academia wiki, it states that Act 1, UA Beginning Saga, ends with the Camino incident where All for One shows up for the first time and All Might uses what's left of his One for All embers. I don't usually trust what's said on a wiki, but upon further review, I feel like this is the most logical point to be the first plot point because All Might, who was the hero and symbol of peace in the world up until this point, is done and can't continue being a hero anymore. He literally points to Deku and tells him that it's his turn. Therefore, this is the point when this hero of the story, who is Deku, has to take the reins. Moving on to Act 2. As I mentioned earlier, Act 2 is the longest of all the acts and contains most of the story and is filled with various points of rising action and obstacles that the protagonist has to overcome. The first of these obstacles is the Provisional Hero License exam. This is the next step Deku must take to become the #1 hero because it will allow him to start doing supervised hero work. And in order to overcome this challenge, he must face up against other schools that want their licenses as well. As for the midpoint, I think it's safe to say that the Shihei Saikai raid takes that spot. The stakes are incredibly high here as Deku, Sir Dainai, and Toguda face off against Overall as a means to rescue Eri from him, who is being used to create quirk erasing bullets. Furthermore, the hero and the story suffer their first losses during this incident. Although Deku is able to defeat Overhaul, Toguda loses his quirk and Sir Night-Eye loses his life in the process. Also, while all this is taking place, Shigaraki, All for One, and the League of Villains are gaining more support and influence. The rising action continues with Deku taking part in a joint training session with Class 1B. During this joint training, Deku unlocks a new quirk within One for All called Black Whip, and now this is one more thing that Deku must learn to master in order to become a good hero and in order to defeat All for One. Act 2 continues to progress with Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki going to train with Endeavor, and during this training, Deku manages to get a handle on Black Whip. Also, rising action continues as we depart from Deku to see what the League of Villains are up to. Shigaraki proves himself worthy to become the next user of All for One and gains an army of over 100,000 members through the Meta Liberation Army. We're now closing in on plot point 2, but we still have some rising action to get through. Oh, and by the way, this is where spoilers begin for those of you who have only watched the anime, so this is your final warning. Alright, let's begin. Here we see Deku, the rest of Class A, and an army of pro heroes as they prepare to investigate the hospital tip where the Nomu are being created. The students prepare to assist with the evacuation of Jakku City, but basically all hell breaks loose. Gigantomachia shows up, Hawks kills twice, and Shigaraki, who is now wielding All for One, engages in battle with Deku, Bakugo, Gran Torino, Aizawa, and Endeavor. Look, I could sit here all day and break down the entire Paranormal Liberation War arc, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to fit My Hero Academia in the 3-act structure, so we're going to fast forward to plot point 2. The ending of Act 2 and plot point 2 is where we find Deku and Hero Society in general at their lowest points. Although Deku has unlocked a few more quirks from One for All and is able to push back Shigaraki from now, there were heavy injuries and some casualties sustained. Deku's arms are once again in shambles, Bakugo was skewered, Aizawa lost a leg and an eye, Gran Torino is hanging to life by a thread, and several pro heroes lost their lives. Oh, and Dabi reveals himself to be Endeavor's thought-to-be-dead son, Toya. This revelation leaves Hero Society a mess because of a broadcast that Toya put out revealing the abuses that he and his family went through at the hands of Endeavor. This new information leaves regular citizens distrustful of heroes. Act 2 ends with Shigaraki breaking out dozens of powerful villains from the maximum security prison Tartarus, and Deku leaving UA and revealing the truth behind his quirk in order to protect his friends and loved ones. Here we are in the final act. As we're all aware, this act isn't over yet, and as of the writing of this script and making this video, it's been going on for just over a year, covering about 60 chapters, give or take, depending on when this video is released. Deku is off on his own fighting villains that were released from Tartarus by Shigaraki and All for One. He fights and defeats Lady Nagant, a former member of the Hero Public Safety Commission turned villain, and abandons the heroes who had been helping him out of fear for their safety. Needless to say, Deku is worn out and his friends at UA know this, and they go out looking for him. With a little help from his friends, Deku returns to UA for a little bit of R&R before the final battle, where we learn that Aoyama has been leaking info to All for One. All of this can be perceived as the pre-climax of the story, with the climax of the story just now beginning. So, is the story barreling towards a conclusion? Well, yeah. But that's how third acts work. They are generally the shortest act of the story and mostly consist of action. Act 3 of My Hero Academia started in March of 2021, and based off Horikoshi's statement at Jump Festa 2021 in December of that same year, he was expecting the story to conclude in about a year, which means the ending of My Hero Academia is expected to happen in December 2022, give or take a few weeks. However, he said that it could last longer if things don't go as well as he's expecting. With all that being said, should Act 3 finish when Horikoshi said it should finish, it'll have gone on for about 20 months and will have consisted of about 70 plus chapters, which is hardly a short period of time. By the way, when I'm giving out lengths and amounts, it's all based on give or take, because there's always different variables that could affect the amount of time and the amount of chapters that are needed to complete this story. I think the reason why everything feels like it's going fast is because, well, it is. A lot of action can make things feel fast. Furthermore, not every story needs to end perfectly, and not all stories will have all the characters get their time of day, and that is just something that we all have to accept. Anyways, I hope this video has put things into perspective for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the state of My Hero Academia in the comment section below. Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you very much, and have a good day.